So that was a lot to feel, and you are about to meet the amazing human Mohamedou. And first, I think we should all take a deep breath and be present with all we are feeling. Oof, a lot. The violence and torture and cruelty and inhumanity. It's very hard to see. But there are beautiful humans also that give us inspiration and hope. So as we find our hearts and feel the grief of one of the horrific stories of this 20 years of the war of and on terror, I want to thank the organizers of this film festival. At Code Pink, our job is to educate, inspire, and activate. To Lena, her team at CCF, and Frank Barat, who's a passion for film and is an organizer extraordinaire. Thank you for bringing this month of exposing the violence and inhumanity of the war on terror for us to sit through, to feel the prices of, and to feel the human stories. The war on terror is actually a way to terrorize the world. So citizens move into fight and flight. So murder, torture, and violence are normalized. It takes away our humanity, while it is the terrorist that is acting, the Pentagon of the United States, the war machine. It distracts us from the inhumanity that is always war, because war is never the answer. I want to honor the work of the other sponsors. In your introductions this morning before the film, I felt the grief at the heart of your work in a world that literally turned against a beautiful people, the peoples of the Middle East. At Code Pink, we look at who lied, who died, who paid, and who profits. The war on terror cost 21 trillion US taxpayer dollars. While 20 years later in the streets of the United States, they're full of the unhoused in encampments, and the poor are getting poorer and the rich richer. The US military has lost almost every war it started since it was engaged in World War II. But the rich are laughing all the way to the bank, which is why we have launched Cut the Pentagon. It's a hashtag, Cut the Pentagon, to bring everyone who cares about people, planet, peace, and a future under one tent. We must stop the hitmen of the imperialist hegemony. Their price tag goes up every year while they embark on these horrific acts that we will see in many of the films. We cannot let murder and torture be normalized, and China is not our enemy. After watching some of these very painful and strong films, the next step is to engage. And we at Code Pink are here for you. We work to end wars and bring the money home to the life-giving needs of our communities. And we have many campaigns to stop this madness, and we give you a way to engage and reach out to those in power every week with that outrage you feel. So we hope you can join us. Right now, we have a campaign against PBS. It's a taxpayer-supported broadcast company in the United States. It has censored a film about how China took everyone out of poverty, because that could make Beijing look too good while they're escalating their aggression on China. This war on China that the US is now engaging in already has victims. They're in the US, as Asian hate is on the rise. I know this is something all of us here can feel from these films that we're watching, and those of the sponsors who work daily on what happens when hate is risen by calls for war. So now that your hearts and minds had a moment to settle, I'm going to turn you over to the warm hands of Suzie Gilbert. She's an impact producer, developing strategies to engage the media and audiences around social issues. She's co-produced Oliver Stone-directed documentaries South of the Border, about the progressive movements in Latin America, Castro in Winter, and Untold History of the United States. She works on whistleblower campaigns and currently at the Tricontinental works on the No Cold War campaign, and at Code Pink, she oversees our engagement to free Julian Assange. A few years ago, Suzie directed her energies and connection in the campaign to release Muhammadu from Guantanamo. So she's been a witness and support to the story in the film you just watched, and has become a dear friend to Muhammadu. So the perfect person to host you in the conversation. Thank you, Suzie, for all you do. And Mo, all of us at Code Pink send you love. Onward to peace.
Thank you, Jodie, so much. And hi, good evening. Is Teri with us? Teri, are you there? And that's Teri Duncan, who was played by Shailene Woodley in the movie. Just seeing if Teri is with us. Hey, Teri.
Hi.
Lovely to sort of see you on screen.
You too.
And welcome, everyone. Mohamedou Slahi is going to be joining us, but right now, unfortunately, he's stuck in immigration at the airport in Dubai, where he's supposed to be representing his country of Mauritania, I believe, in the Dubai Expo. And director Kevin Macdonald is also trying to log on. So, but in the meantime, feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll try and keep this super interactive. So please put your questions for Teri in the chat, and it should be a really interesting conversation. Teri, lovely to meet you. You and I haven't had the chance to properly meet yet. Where are you right now?
I am in my office in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in the US.
Cool. Tell me, obviously this is a dramatized, version of you. You're in some of the most poignant moments with Muhammadu, where, when you're calling, trying to reach Muhammadu's mother and telling him about your conversation with his mother, the bit where Nancy snaps at you and you're sort of explaining that your own, I think, was it your father or your father-in-law didn't want you at dinner. Can you speak a little bit about, how much of that happened, how much of it was a dramatization? It would just be great to hear about how that all happened.
Sure. So I think the emotional connection that's shown in the movie between me and Muhammadu is very real. We spent years meeting together at Guantanamo. I was fortunate enough to meet his family a couple of times, and when I traveled to Mauritania. So that part, I think it getting to know a client, getting to know their families, it is really emotional. And now Muhammadu and I are friends. I think that sometimes in things like what we call the war on terror, we tend to dehumanize the people who are the targets of what our government does. And when you work on this side, on the side of defending, you get to know the complexity of people. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to sit with someone who's being wrongly detained and held from their family for over a decade. And it was one of the hardest parts of representing Muhammadu, was in some ways being that sort of interacting between him and his family and having to share heartbreaking news like the death of his mother and the death of his brother when he was at Guantanamo. So there was absolutely an incredibly emotional representation. And it was always very, very hard to leave Guantanamo and to leave him behind all those years. So it was just incredibly heart expanding to finally get to see him when he was released in Mauritania, which is we'd all dreamed of over the years.
And in particular, the scene where you're trying to reach his mother, was how close to the truth was that? I mean, were you able to what happened there? I'm really curious, because obviously we really feel that relationship with his mother is so key, and just curious what happened.
So that part of it was actually done by another lawyer on our team. But we did, once we learned that Muhammadu was at Guantanamo, we did immediately reach out to his family and try to develop that relationship. And it was very emotional because his family didn't know where he had been. You know, the scene in the movie where Muhammadu's driving away and his mother is in the rear window, like that really happened. Suddenly her son disappeared. And for over a year, she thought that he was in a prison in Mauritania and she was bringing him food and clothes. And of course, we now know he wasn't in Mauritania anymore. He was in Jordan. So yeah, absolutely. It was incredibly powerful to connect to her and for her to speak to people who had actually seen her son and could report that he was okay. And that was in a time when Muhammadu wasn't able to communicate regularly with his family. So it was a really powerful moment. And any connection with his family throughout the years was incredibly powerful. It's a wonderful family. I mean, were very loyal, worked hard on behalf of Muhammadu, his constant champions.
Wonderful. I'm so grateful you were able to do that. I know his brother Yadi, who's wonderful and has been to London, but I haven't met the rest yet. So Teri, I'm curious for your perspective on Muhammadu's emotional journey in the film and in real life. One of the things that most people comment on that's so incredible about Muhammadu is where he's at emotionally today in terms of his forgiveness. And there was a line at the end of the New Yorker profile of him that won the Pulitzer Prize, I think, last year. It was a long piece in the New Yorker, but right at the end, the writer said something to the effect that, you know, Muhammadu is free today, yet that he doesn't have freedom to travel, and he also does not have freedom to express a full range of emotions. And so I wanted to ask you what you think about that quote, and just like how you've seen his journey from anger to forgiveness and just your perspective on that.
Sure. Well, I think while he was at Guantanamo, I mean, Muhammadu is an exceptional human being. And I think because of his exceptionalism is one of the reasons he survived so well and was able to tell the story that he told. So, you know, I think one of the reasons he survived at Guantanamo is because of his own commitment to humanity, not only his humanity, but also the humanity of the people around him. And so I think he was able to survive by staying committed to identifying and connecting to the humanity of even the people who wronged him. So I think that was something that was very consistent from the very beginning. So even when we first met him, there was some anger, but there was mostly the Muhammadu that you see today. I mean, someone who understood why people did horrible things, understood that we're all more than the worst thing we ever did. So, you know, I think over time, I think Muhammadu, when I first met him, still believed that the US justice system could work for him and that we would be able to go into court and he could tell his story and a judge would say, this is clearly an injustice and release him. And over time, it became increasingly frustrating that wasn't happening. And particularly when we won the habeas case and the Obama administration appealed that decision, that was incredibly heartbreaking for Muhammadu and for all of us, because we were so close to justice and we had such hope in what President Obama had said about closing Guantanamo. And so that sort of about face and shutting him down was really awful. And I think that sent us all into sort of a dark place for a little while. And then Muhammadu used his writing and his inner strength to kind of come back up to keep fighting for his freedom. And since he returned home, you know, he still runs into trouble. He didn't have a passport for several years. He now has his Mauritanian passport. He wasn't allowed to travel and had some trouble getting visas to go to visit certain countries. Although, as you mentioned earlier, he's in Dubai, so he is able to travel. And we're hoping that he'll be able to travel more and more as time goes on, because he's such an important message to share with the world. And as wonderful as he is over video, he's even more wonderful in person. So fingers crossed that that's going to happen. But, you know, of course, having been in Guantanamo for so long takes an emotional toll. And I know that that's something Muhammadu still struggles with. I don't really feel like I can speak to where he is right now. That's sort of his story to tell. But absolutely, I can still see the impact of Guantanamo on Muhammadu, even this many years after his release. And I think that's true of a lot of the men who have been released from Guantanamo and are trying to build new lives.
Sure. We'll go to a question from the audience, and please also feel free to mention where you're writing from, and we'll, shout out. So somebody is asking if the torturers have had any charges and what the status is with that. We've heard about some, was it Canadians getting sort of also the other side of it, getting damages, but so the question is, have the torturers had any charges?
No, none of the torturers have had any charges. As far as I know, no one who was involved in violence and torture at Guantanamo has ever been charged or disciplined in any way.
Hello, Kevin, welcome.
Hi, apologies to everyone. I couldn't get my Wi-Fi to work. I'm staying in a hotel and it was terrible.
Oh.
Hi, Teri. How are you?
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Welcome. Where are you today, Kevin?
I'm in Los Angeles, actually. Yeah, where the Wi-Fi doesn't work.
Well, very grateful you're here, and hopefully Muhammadu will join us in a little bit.
Yes.
Teri and I have just been having a little chat, and she was just answering a question from the audience about have the torturers received any charges. So I'll let Teri finish, and then we'll go to the next question. Sorry, Teri.
That's okay. The short answer is no, that no one has ever been charged with what was done to Muhammadu. No one, as far as we know, has ever been disciplined or faced any consequences for what they did.
Okay. Kevin, obviously a huge thank you for making this movie and for managing to get this movie made. You've said in interviews that you wanted to make a movie that might cross over and that wouldn't just appeal to the sort of folks who follow this issue anyway. And I was curious, how did that impact how you made the film to not just go, okay, I'm going to maybe make a super artsy or super whatever film. How did you go about making a film that would, not preach to the converted and reach other people?
Well, I think there were a couple of different ways in which we tried to do that. I don't know whether we did it successfully, but there were ways that we tried to do it. And obviously one of them is to have both Colonel Couch represented, who's a member of the government's legal team, and to have Nancy and Teri. And so to not make a movie that is knee-jerk anti-American, where actually there are, very, very good moral people who are these American lawyers, where the fault lies with the individuals in Guantanamo and with the government and with the system, I suppose, and not with any one individual. And so I wanted it to be a film that, obviously, America is very polarized at the moment. And I didn't want it to be a movie that one side would just go, I'm not even going to bother watching that. And of course, that's also then the reason why we tried to put mainstream stars in the film. And we were really lucky to be able to get people like Benedict Cumberbatch and Jodie Foster and Shailene Woodley, who are all, commercial stars to take part in the film, sometimes in quite small roles, but because they wanted to focus attention on this issue. So yeah, those were the two primary ways. I guess the third way was maybe in when we were, the big challenge of making a script from Muhammadou's story is that the story takes place over such a long period of time. There are so many legal complexities that are actually absolutely fascinating that Nancy and Teri and Colonel Couch were all involved with. But they take place over many, many years, and they're quite complex for an audience, or for me to understand. So it was simplifying the movie down, and of course you've got to make really difficult decisions when you're trying to make it simple. But it was important to me that this was something which I hoped an ordinary audience, a non-specialist audience, could understand and ultimately feel emotionally connected to Muhammadu. That was primary thing in my head is, I want this to be Muhammadou's film. I want people to emotionally connect with him, feel for him. And that's, in a way, the biggest or the most revolutionary thing you can do in making a film about the war on terror, to make your audience, the Western audience, sympathize with one of the people who's the victim of that war.
Absolutely, and thank you for doing that and succeeding in that. I'm curious, because this is a War on Terror film festival, and this is a question for both of you. To what extent, before you even got involved in this film, had you followed the critiques and the hullabaloo around films like Zero Dark 30? Was that something that you'd followed closely? I realize you're probably going to, be diplomatic, but I'm just curious how closely you'd followed it, and
I'll go first, but I think I hadn't followed them obsessively, but I was fascinated. I'm fascinated in this subject, obviously, and I knew that when Zero Dark 30 came out, that it had an attendant controversy around it, which was that it took the CIA's version of the story at face value, and the utility of torture, that the CIA told them, this had been effective and it was crucial to capturing bin Laden. Obviously, those were very controversial points of view, and that made me conscious of the fact we don't want to be doing that. We don't want to make any of those sort of suggestions. I think that probably the impact on our movie of the other films is that you want to do something different. You want to do something that was not done in The Report, which came out a couple of years ago, originally called The Torture Report, and but The Report it ended up being called The Report, which was very much all set in Washington DC, and it was a kind of the backroom shenanigans of lawyers trying to release the report into the torture, not just at Guantanamo, but elsewhere. So we were just conscious of trying to be different.
Yeah. Teri, how about you? How much had you followed the hullabaloo?
We followed the hullabaloo quite a bit. I mean, I have to say, I watched the film, and it was infuriating, having lived through it and so many different parts, not just Muhammadou's story, but what we know about Iraq and the false intelligence. And so the idea that it was portraying that torture works when we know it doesn't really work was incredibly frustrating and infuriating. And then also just being concerned about the impact of that narrative on the people at Guantanamo, and how the American people viewed those who continued to be detained unlawfully, and I think unfairly. So we did, and it was great to see in the Mauritanian that different perspective, which I think is a more accurate perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm curious how this experience has been releasing the film in the pandemic, and also how you've been following the responses to the film, because obviously it's quite different now releasing a film to even 7 or 8 years ago. You can go on Amazon Prime and you read hundreds of reviews, and it's quite extraordinary to see them coming up. How has that experience been, sort of releasing the film now, seeing the responses, and have you been surprised by the responses? How has that journey been for you both?
Well, obviously, it was disappointing not to be able to take the film a traditional route, to take it to a festival. The plan was originally to take it to Telluride Festival, Toronto Festival, Venice, one of those festivals in 2020, I guess, the fall of 2020. But the pandemic prevented that, and we ended up with this largely online release, which you get less of a focus, less attention, less written about the film, and I think it's harder for people to find it. But I think that the most disappointing thing about the release, in a way, was that we didn't get the critical support that we really wanted, that we really felt we should have had. And why that was, I don't really know. I think it's a film which really works on a number of levels, and which an audience respond to very emotionally. As I've seen from talking to people and seen in comments and that sort of thing. But for some reason, critics here in America, particularly, were very damning of the film, which it came as a surprise to us, actually. And elsewhere in the world, not, it'd be much more positive. But here not. And I think obviously critics are kind of the gatekeepers. And so, if they are not supportive, if a buzz doesn't start to build, it's very hard to get, numbers of people to watch the film. So I think, the aim at the beginning, as I said, was to make a film about this issue and focusing on Muhammadou's character that would reach a wide audience and not just the people who already, believe what maybe we believe. And I'm not sure how successful we were in that, unfortunately, in the US. But of course, the other side of an internet release is that the film goes on forever. It has a life, a long tail, as they say. Mm-hmm. So, people will discover it through events like this, and they'll talk to their friends about it, and it will find its audience. And that's the wonder of online releasing.
Yeah, and as I've mentioned to you, Kevin, I've been pleasantly surprised that people who I wouldn't have expected to be interested in this kind of film, I was sitting next to some sort of very conservative banker type, and he was just raving to me about what a life-affirming, inspiring kind of, Muhammadou's journey, how life-affirming it was. And I was not expecting him to be the sort of person who would have watched it or enjoyed it, if I was being a bit judgmental, perhaps. But I was very pleasantly surprised by sort of people I didn't think would be interested were really.
Well, I think that's because I think we tried to make it for ordinary people, if I can use that, people who aren't necessarily, film buffs, and people who are going to be, only watching a kind of highly political film, or I wanted it to be sort of an entertainment at the same time as being highly, a highly political story. And I think that balance, if you can get it right, is obviously it demonstrates what's wonderful about movies, which is they can really affect people emotionally and therefore change their opinions about things, change their minds, change their prejudices in this case.
Yeah. Kevin, I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about your background, in that you've made quite a few films that are, focused in other parts of the world. Muhammadu and I recently watched your Bob Marley documentary together, and you described that as the first, first superstar from the global south, and then you mentioned that when you first met Muhammadu, you were kind of in the region anyway, like you were, I don't know where you were, you just happened to be near Mauritania. And I'm curious, what's your story in terms of, you do such a mix of films and documentaries, and where did your politics come from, or your sort of interest in this kind of storytelling?
Gosh, that's a really, I'm sure nobody wants to hear my 10-hour autobiography, but I'll try and give you the brief one. I mean, I don't know why I've always been interested in stories which I guess are about humanizing people who are not normally humanized, and that goes for Bob Marley. I made a film about him 10 years ago, which was everything else that had ever been written or made about him was sort of treating him as this kind of legend, as this god. And of course, my impulse is always to say, well, who was he though? Where did he come from? Who was he as a human being? What motivated him? And I took that to his family, and they agreed to sort of make that kind of film. They took part in it, and it was a very happy experience. But I think it sort of changes who you think that person is. And I did a long time ago a film called The Last King of Scotland, which is about Idi Amin and a doctor, a Scottish doctor who comes to work for him in the early 70s. And I mean, that film, I suppose, in today's perspective, you would say it's a film about white privilege. Although I don't know if that phrase existed back in 2005 or 6 when the film came out. And I guess maybe that, because I traveled quite a lot when I was younger in Africa, and I became very aware of that sense of how you are seen as a privileged white person in East Africa or West Africa or wherever I was going. And it makes you think about the perspective from which you're telling stories and the kinds of stories you're telling. And I think that very much stuck with me. And I happened to be, when I first got involved with this, and I was talking to Nancy and Teri and everyone else about it, I was making a documentary about a great Senegalese musician called Baba Mal, who, if you don't know him, you should check out. He's amazing. And I was making a documentary on him, and he happened to live on the border of Senegal and Mauritania, on the river Senegal. And so I was talking to Muhammadu saying, let's get together. You're just on the other side of the river. And then I said, well, I'm going to sneak across illegally because there was no border crossing. I'm just going to take a canoe across the water. And Nancy very firmly told Muhammadu on no circumstances was he to come and meet me because I was an illegal crosser and he would be blamed for it. And there was probably a drone watching him. And, what were we playing at? So we didn't actually meet. We had to make do with Zoom calls until very close to actually making the film.
Wow, thank you. On speaking of like being monitored and stuff, question for both of you. We know there are certain movies where the Department of Defense or the CIA, gets involved and give notes on scripts and offer equipment. Did you ever get the impression that this was being in any way monitored or anything like that?
I don't know, Teri, you want to?
Yeah, I don't think I wasn't close enough to the production to be able to answer that, so I defer to Kevin.
I don't think so. I made a kind of half-hearted attempt to get permission to go to Guantanamo to do some research there. And at that time, it was very difficult, and I wasn't given the permission. But they obviously do give journalists permission to go. But I decided because the prison that you got to see was totally different than what had been there in 2003, 4, whenever we were focusing our story, that it wasn't necessarily going to be that useful anyway. So I never actually went. The only thing I would say was in relation to this was that there were certain journalists here in America when the film came out who said to me, well, I've got contacts within the CIA or, some deep part of the American state. And they tell me that Muhammadu is guilty and that you're just being naive and that there's plenty of evidence that just hasn't come out yet. And of course, that to me, I think was probably an official policy. And I think whoever was spoken to, it was like, they didn't want to be embarrassed by the film and by the fact that there was no evidence against him, and that so they still have this narrative which is just whispered. It's not official. It's a whispered narrative, which is, yeah, you're just very naive, and we've got evidence. We just couldn't quite pin it on him, or that seemed to be the official line.
Wow. And what kind of reporters were they? Presumably those weren't movie people. Those were more like.
That was when I spoke to a few people, I think from the the USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, people who were possibly political journalists who I'm sure had their contacts with the government. And so I think 2 or 3 times I got that kind of narrative back at me, which I thought, that's very, obnoxious is one word for it, but it was because it felt like, particularly because it felt like that must be a deliberate policy.
Yeah. And of course those journalists are not at all naive for listening to that. Teri, do you want to tell us a little bit of an update until Muhammadu joins us on Muhammadu's current sort of status and the impact of this movie has perhaps had on his life a little bit in terms of what he's able to do or not do?
Sure. I mean, he's continued to write. He has released a book of fiction, Zara, which you can get on Amazon and any other bookseller. He's been traveling a bit and talking to people. He's not only advocating for the closure of Guantanamo, but also advocating on a number of human rights issues. He got married, has a son, so he's building a life outside of Guantanamo. Right now he's traveling, which is unfortunately why he's not able to join us. I know he was really looking forward to this.
Well, it's nice to hear he's traveling, at least compared to where things were.
I don't know if you know where what he's doing. That he's on his way to Dubai because he is representing the country of Mauritania at the World's Fair, I think it's called, or the Expo, World Expo in Dubai. And I think that is what an amazing thing, that he is the kind of official face of Mauritania in that for that event. I think that must be very meaningful for him, I think.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, Kevin, tell us a little bit, just a small detail about the title, because I know there was a different title. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey on choosing the title?
Well, yes, originally, of course, the film was called Guantanamo Diary, which was the name of Muhammadou's book. And all the salespeople and distributors said, that's terrible, we can't have Guantanamo in the title. And we sort of agreed with that, and I think Muhammadu sort of understood that as well. I don't think he ever felt that Guantanamo Diary was like the best title in the world, so he wasn't that precious about it. But then, of course, trying to find another title that we could all agree on was difficult. And there was a temporary title, which was Prisoner 760, which was his ID number in Guantanamo, which none of us liked. But for some reason, the salespeople, of course, this was a very hard film to get off the ground, very hard film to get the money for. And so when the salespeople said, look, we can't sell the Guantanamo, but we could sell Prisoner 760. Sounds like a exciting prison genre film. Maybe there's some action, that's the way they think. We all said, we don't like it, but if you could sell it as that, then we'll change it. But of course, then what happens is it has a momentum and they wanted to keep it like that. But it was actually Jodie Foster who really stood up for this alternative title, The Mauritanian, which is what myself and the producers and I think Nancy and Teri, we all thought that's a great title because it's about Muhammadu. Muhammadu is the Mauritanian. And there's also a kind of mystery to it, because I think people, where is Mauritania? What is the Mauritanian? There's an intrigue. And actually, Jodie Foster said, the only reason I opened your email with the script in it was because it was called The Mauritanian. And I thought, what the hell is that? And so she said, that's why people are going to watch this film. So she said to the distributors, I'm not doing any press unless you keep that title. That's the best. So they, if you're Jodie Foster, they listen to you. So we kept that title. And I think we all really like it. And of course, the Mauritanian government is actually very happy about it because they feel that, their government has changed. The president who was in power, who kind of sold Muhammadu away to the Americans, is long gone. And they want to put distance between themselves, that period and now. And they actually held a premiere, the government-sponsored premiere for us about 4 months ago, which was a wonderful event in Mauritania where there's no cinema. We had to bring a projector and sound system up from Senegal, 500 miles across the desert, effectively, in a truck over the river, and set it up. And that still to this date is the only in-person screening I have been to of the movie, which very appropriately was in Mauritania.
That's the only in-person screening you've been to of the movie. Yes. Wow.
Yes. Yes.
Wow. Teri, have you been to any in-person screenings?
I have not, no.
Wow. We look forward to it. Inshallah, at some point.
Mm.
Can I ask you a silly side note question, Kevin? How people have commented, obviously, when you're watching Nancy in the movie, you can't help but think of Clarice occasionally. Mm-hmm. How deliberate, like?
Well, I think, often with actors, their baggage is not useful to you, because you always think they're going to be comedic if you have them playing a serious role, or serious if you have them playing a comedic role. But in this case, the baggage that she brought, which is, that iconic role, Clarice Starling in The Silence of the Lambs, actually was, I think, really helpful because it made you feel, as she's walking into the prison with Teri for the first time, it made you think, oh, this man must be a monster. He's going to be like Anthony Hopkins. And I think that's quite useful just in terms of the storytelling of the film, because obviously we want the audience to be thinking at that particular moment, to be thinking, who is this person? What's he really like? Is he a monster? And we're going to show that obviously he's not, but it gives us a good starting point, a sort of a stereotype to kick against.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I was curious about that.
Yeah.
Just to remind folks, please feel free to pop a question in your chat and that'll be passed along, and let us know where you are. Teri and I were discussing before you came on, Kevin, there was a New Yorker profile of Muhammadu, as you know, that won a Pulitzer Prize. And at the end of the long piece, the writer made a little comment about how, you know, not only does Muhammadu not have full freedom to travel now, but he also doesn't have full freedom to express a range of emotions. And I was curious, Teri commented on a little bit, but how did you approach sort of Muhammadu's emotional journey? Because he's obviously, you close with that incredibly charismatic moments of the real Muhammadu and being in an emotionally, you know, good place. But how did you balance how much of the different emotions to show, how much to stay in the anger, all that kind of stuff, you know, whilst keeping him charismatic and sympathetic and bringing in the humor? How did you balance that all?
Well, I think that's, you know, that's an interesting thing to ask about, because that was probably the hardest thing for me as a director to balance. And luckily, Tahar Rahim, the actor who plays Muhammadu, is absolutely brilliant, and he's one of the few kind of foreign language actors who's able to act really naturally in his second language, in English, or it's his third language actually. But he's learned English well enough that he can really he can improvise, he can play around a bit, while still feeling like he's a foreigner, which is obviously what you want. So we actually did a lot of improvisation and a lot of, you know, try it this way, try it that way. Let's play this take up for the humor. Let's play this one up for the sort of the anger or the more resentful side of Muhammadu. And so I was actually able to slowly build up who I felt the character was through these different, he'd try it this way, try it that way. They say, oh, well, let's do this bit like that. Let's do this bit like that. And so it was a real collaboration of finding that character, because it's very difficult even in the writing to sort of get that correct, you know. And Muhammadu, hopefully we'll meet him in a minute. He says on the chat there that he's going to join us soon. He, you know, he's incredibly funny. He's also incredibly can be incredibly serious and wise, and can be incredibly traumatized as well. So all of these things are in him, and that makes it a wonderful role for an actor because it's so complex. But it makes it a very, very hard role to write down and to be absolutely definite about. So, you know, having an actor who could improvise, who could try things out, that was absolutely essential.
Thank you. And apologies, I wasn't seeing the questions, but I can now. So Teri, you have a question about, can you tell us more details about the process struggle under Obama? And then we'll come to some other questions.
Sure. So we had our evidentiary hearing after President Obama took office in 2009, and the district court ordered Muhammadu released in 2010. So the struggle really was that the Obama administration made the decision to appeal to the appellate court for the District of Columbia, which it didn't need to do. So the judge who ruled that Muhammadu should be released, that the government didn't have the evidence to hold him, was a really well-respected judge who had denied other petitions of people at Guantanamo, denied them release. And so it was really surprising that the Obama administration, given his promise to close Guantanamo, had taken that position of appealing a decision from such a judge. And then we had to go into the appellate court. And unfortunately, what the appellate court held was that the legal standard had kind of evolved over time, so that by the time we got to that appellate court, there was a new standard. And so it ordered us to go back down to the district court and relitigate it under this new standard. And everything just kind of froze for several years. So, I mean, ultimately, the Obama administration did release Muhammadu. So I can't hold like the full grudge, but I do hold President Obama and his administration responsible for keeping Muhammadu there for an unnecessary 7 years, which is the period in which his mother died and his brother died. So yeah, they bear responsibility for what happened.
A follow-up question is, are there any commonalities with other folks who've been held in terms of his journey? And somebody's asking.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's quite a community actually of artists and writers who were imprisoned at Guantanamo, and their names are escaping me right now. I think there's Mansour Dahi just published a book. So yeah, absolutely. I think that there are a lot of really exceptional people who were wrongly held at Guantanamo. There may be some people who did things that the government accused them of, but of course they were still deprived of their rights and of the basic human dignity that we're all entitled to. So I think that really anyone who was imprisoned at Guantanamo for any period of time does, share some similarities with Muhammadu. And hopefully it's going to, Guantanamo will close soon, as it very much should.
How do you think that's looking right now?
I don't know. There's so much. Our country is so divided. There's so much right now on the Biden administration's plate. I don't think this is a priority. So I'm hopeful, but do I? Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's unlikely.
Say that again.
I think it's unlikely in this administration, or at least in this phase of this administration.
Okay, thank you. So a question before Muhammadu gets here. Somebody's asking, is the book worth reading despite the black marks? Thanks for the advice. I really want to read it. Yes,
it is very well. I'll give my opinion. Take it over. Very, very much so. But actually, there is an edition where Muhammadu filled in the blanks, I think, as best as he could remember what he had written, and that's probably the one to read. The other one is more of a. It is quite hard to read because everything's blacked out all over the place. But the other thing about the new edition is that, which has not got the redactions, is that it has the most wonderful introduction, which describes the last days of Muhammadu's time in the prison and his journey home and his arrival home. I think that also is worth reading because it shows just what a beautiful writer Muhammadu is. Obviously, the original letters were written not in exactly ideal circumstances, and they weren't written, I think, necessary for publication. And whereas actually the introduction of the new edition of the book demonstrates, I think, that when he has the time and the space, that he's really a natural-born, wonderful writer.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I agree that the new version that Muhammadu has filled in is the one to read. And I think the old version with all the redactions is just a historical document for us all to sort of hold on to remember how hard the US government fought to keep his story from the public. But he's an incredible, just a beautiful writer and a beautiful storyteller. So I can't recommend his book highly enough.
And he's also just recently published a novel.
Mm-hmm.
Which is available on Amazon and I'm sure elsewhere, which is also very, very and completely different. It's the story of a man and his camels in the desert.
Somebody's asking, how can we support the film and promote it?
Well, I think that the best way to support the film is to tell people about it, have people watch it, write about it on Twitter, review it on IMDb and Amazon and all these places. Because I think that, the main issue we've had is just getting the word out. It's been very, very hard to get the movie seen by the numbers of people that it should be seen by. So anything anyone can do, that would be really appreciated.
Okay, let's look at the other questions. Thank you very much. Question for Kevin. What are the challenges of making a film based on a true story? And somebody's asking, could this film have been a documentary? And if so, how would you have made it?
Well, I don't think it really could have been a documentary because you can't put an audience sort of into the position that Muhammadu was in at that time. All you can do with a documentary really on this sort of subject, because it's retrospective, is you can have talking heads, you can have people describing what happened. And that can be totally fascinating. And for a long time, I wanted to make a documentary to go alongside it or a podcast to go alongside it, but kind of run out of steam to do that. There is a wonderful short documentary which you can see on the Guardian website, which is about Muhammadu now that he's free in Mauritania and his friendship with Steve Wood, who was one of his guards, who's kind of depicted slightly inaccurately, but he's depicted in the movie by the guard Steve. But their story is really beautiful, and Muhammadu met Steve when he was after he had been tortured, and he had really lost the will to live, I think, and almost maybe lost his faith. And Steve was a guard who befriended him and who started bringing books and DVDs and things, and they developed a really close bond. Particularly, I think Steve smuggled in a photograph of his newborn daughter and showed it to Muhammadu, and I think that was a really significant moment of human contact for him. So Steve and he have remained like best buddies. Steve came with us to Mauritania to the premiere there, which was wonderful. They're kind of like, I'm not American, so I shouldn't say this, but they're like frat boys together, There's a lot of watching of Chris Rock videos and Comedy Channel roasts, which I didn't even know what a roast was till I met those two.
Same. And your choice of song is a nod to their movie watching, no? The song at the end?
Yeah, absolutely. So the song at the end is the Bob Dylan song is from The Big Lebowski, and that was a movie which they watched together. And I think Muhammadu claims that he's watched it like 92 times, or I can't remember how many times, but a lot of times. And he does pretty much know every word by heart, and he knows the songs. So when I went to visit him finally in the flesh, I spent 2 or 3 days with him, and I was interviewing him about trying to get everything factually correct, and what was the cell like, and what was it like when you arrived, and just to get the real detail. And this is sort of answering, I guess, the previous question about how do you make a story of it, how do you make a film out of a true story. A lot of interviewing people, talking to people, discussing, and but we were just about to go for lunch somewhere, and he said, "Oh, we have to play this song," and he put the song on, and my camera just happened to be still running, and he sang it, and it just seemed so touching, because it really evokes Muhammadu's character, his joy, but also there's the tinge of sorrow there, but also because it's about, I suppose, in some ways about Nancy and Teri as well, isn't it? It feels like that's what it's also about. So it just felt very appropriate.
I'm very glad you did. A question for Teri. This is about a dramatic moment between you and Nancy in the movie. Somebody asks, at some point in the movie, Nancy asks you to leave the case. What was that about? I realized that you returned at some later time.
So that didn't happen in real life. I think as Kevin can explain better than I can, my character brings in parts of the story of a whole team of lawyers. And so there were some dramatic moments in the case that were played out through me. So I did stay on the case with Nancy from the very beginning to the very end. I think that in the movie, it is an accurate portrayal of how Nancy would have reacted if a young lawyer had expressed to her the doubts that I expressed. Because you can't be a criminal defense lawyer, you can't defend someone in the human rights context if you're constantly second guessing your story and worrying about how your family or the public is going to view you in your representation. So I think it really captured that, which is an important part of Guantanamo, because there were a lot of young lawyers, a lot of older lawyers who were receiving a lot of grief and they had from the public, and you had to be able to put that to the side to stay true to the representation.
And I'd like to add to that, which my eternal gratitude to Teri and to Nancy, that they both allowed me to fictionalize around their lives, to simplify massively, of course. Their story of many years reduced to 10 scenes or something, and of course it's always going to be inadequate. There, as Teri says, there was another lawyer. There were various other lawyers who were involved in the case, and some of the things that happened between Nancy and Teri actually happened with another lawyer, or with a member of the group. So we decided that for dramatic purposes, it's better to make it just two people. In actual fact, I think Teri wasn't at the first meeting. There was another lawyer who was at the first meeting with Muhammadu. I don't think Teri does speak French, which was fortunate. We didn't have to do it in French because Shailene Woodley could not speak a word of French. And it was just getting her to say, "We're your lawyers." Probably the most number of takes we had in the whole film.
Okay, thank you. Somebody's asking what happened to prisoner, was it prisoner 242? Is that the correct number?
Yeah, I think so. Well, so that prisoner is based on a prisoner whose number I don't think any of us know, who Muhammadu spoke to, who he talked to through the cell walls, and I think only saw once, rather like it's depicted in the film. And we don't know if that prisoner killed himself, but we know that many other prisoners did kill themselves, and that felt like an important part of, understanding the psychology that someone like Muhammadu, the place that they're in psychologically when they're told, this person who you knew has died, they've killed themselves. And the sequence where everybody prays, they say that, I think it's the Muslim prayer for the dead, the Islamic prayer for the dead. That happened, and that was over the death of a very young man. I think he was a boy even. I think he was 16 or 17 who killed himself. And everybody along the block started praying together. So, as with some of the things that Teri was saying, we've taken things that happened at different times and different characters and put them together into one character.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just an update on Muhammadu. So Muhammadu says he's on his way and will be with us soon, but we, of course, we don't really know how soon that is. So we can take a group decision on how we would like to proceed. But in the meantime, I can ask a couple more questions. How's everyone doing? Is everyone all right?
I guess those who are getting bored can leave and come back.
Okay. I mean, I meant more the two of you, to be honest. Okay.
I'm fine. Teri's probably got more important things to do than I have. So.
I don't. I'm fine for a little longer.
Okay. We have a distribution question. Columbia Pictures distributed Gandhi with Ben Kingsley and Attenborough direction that helps understand the success of the film. How can films like The Mauritanian get that level of support and distribution?
Well, it's always a mystery. There's a famous Hollywood saying, which is nobody knows anything. In other words, what works once won't necessarily work again. The rules change. What people like one year, they're not going to like that next year. So I think a lot of the success of a film is down to timing and to do with the sort of the little bits of luck about how people perceive it. I feel like The Mauritanian was very much on in normal times when people weren't in a pandemic and weren't feeling so miserable, I think that there would have been embraced more. But I think it's a tough subject maybe for people when they've been sitting for best part of a year inside and not able to see their family and their friends, and to have a film set in a prison is quite difficult. And obviously the film does feature some quite disturbing imagery, which is largely suggestive in what, it doesn't show that much, but it is suggestive. But of course, any sense that we have as an audience that somebody is being treated, even if we're not seeing the, necessarily absolutely all the physical brutality, it's very hard to watch. So I think people hear, oh, it's got a tough sequence in it, and they're like, am I going to watch 4 Weddings and a Funeral again, or am I going to watch Mauritanian? I think it's difficult, but I feel like, for me, the movie is an uplifting movie, and because Muhammadu's story and his character is a very uplifting story, actually, he has survived. He has thrived in a way. He has published this book. He's had a movie made of it. He's been married, has a son. And obviously that doesn't take away from the horrible things that happened in the many, many years that were stolen from him. But there is actually an uplift to the film and to his story. And I think that I wish people would focus more on that.
Absolutely. Like I said, and I was so happy to hear some people saying that. And I always say, and you conveyed this so beautifully, but I always say to me, Muhammadu is Viktor Frankl, who wrote, Man's Search for Meaning, meets Chris Rock. He's got the sort of profundity, but if that's the right word, but and the levity. Okay, a couple more questions. Have you gotten feedback from other former Guantanamo prisoners?
All right, Teri, have you heard any feedback?
No, I haven't.
I did take part in a panel in the UK for an organization, I believe they're called CAGE, is that correct? You're aware, Susie, which is an organization set up to help ex-Guantanamo inmates and also to pressure for the closure of Guantanamo. And I think that the response was generally very positive. But I think there were also some people who felt, well, why are you showing only this part of the story? Why are you not showing? Why are the two lawyers so nice? There's stories like that. Why do we have to have some nice Americans in this?
Right.
So I mean, I think a mix of responses, as you'd expect, but generally positive. And as I said, they wanted to talk about it. There were a lot of people there on the forum when we discussed it. And I think that not everybody has not every ex-inmate has had Muhammadu's opportunities since getting out. And I think, that's indicated by the fact that I think he's the first, Teri, you might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's the first Guantanamo inmate to be allowed to travel internationally outside of his own country. When they're deported effectively or sent back to their home country by America, they're then basically trapped in whatever country that is. Or some of them have been sent to other countries which are not their own countries. I think some were sent to Kazakhstan and they're, pretty much held under house arrest there. So Muhammadu has, he managed to come to South Africa to see the filming, which was a really wonderful, inspiring trip. And he came recently to England, where you and I, Susie, saw him, and he stayed with you, and then he stayed with me, and it was a lovely experience. So I think other people, maybe there's a little bit of resentment, but I'm not really probably in the right place to say that.
Teri, do you have any thoughts on that? Or?
I mean, I think that's probably right. I mean, Muhammadu suffered indignities and torture that other people at Guantanamo didn't suffer. And at the same time, as you're saying, his story has received attention that other people's stories have not received. I think, that people who've been released from Guantanamo, I think a few have been able to travel, but it's again taken several years for them to do so. And it's like one trip, and it's not, it's not an open visa to wherever they want to go. And certainly a lot of people who were released from Guantanamo were released without the resources that they needed to rebuild their lives. So, and I'm really appreciative of organizations like CAGE who have provided the resources that the United States government should have been providing them. But I haven't had any interactions with other people who were released from Guantanamo about the film in particular.
I think that when I spoke to CAGE, the point that they made was there are so many different experiences of Guantanamo, and this is one, and this is a personal one, Muhammadu's, and that there are many, many different narratives that everybody would like their story to be told, and not one film is not going to summarize the overall experience.
I think that's right. And I think, one of the things that was really interesting to me about the film is I come from a family that's pretty divided. So I have a big part of my family is super conservative, and part of my community is really conservative, and were not supportive of my work at Guantanamo. And then they watched this film, and I got all these calls. Sometimes like they were too embarrassed to actually admit it to me, so it would come through other people. But like, did this really happen? I mean, is this true? And is he really like this? And I feel like one of the really great things about this film is, even if it can't tell everyone's story at Guantanamo, by making people question what happened to Muhammadu, and seeing him as a human being, is helping these people, like conservative people in my community and in my world, who would have never thought of anyone at Guantanamo as a human being, to now start asking questions and looking at people there a lot differently. So yeah, I feel like it benefited everyone at Guantanamo in bringing that humanity to the people who were there.
Well, bravo. Somebody's mentioning, just saying, I really loved the scene between Nancy and the journalist, a powerful and telling portrayal of how the media approaches terrorism cases and stigmatizes them in the way they don't other cases. Lena is also mentioning that Mozambique has also talked about a friendly guard. Okay. What should we do about Muhammadu? Because we're sort of a little bit over time. I mean, I'm going to defer to both of you. Would you like to make an executive decision?
Maybe Muhammadu could join another conversation another time. I don't know.
Yes. I think Lena has mentioned that. I think there's a screening tomorrow, and the film is available on Amazon Prime. How many countries is that in?
Well, I think the film is available in the US. It's available. I don't know where the people who are taking part in this are, but the film is available in quite a few territories in Europe and in India on Amazon Prime. So it's available for free if you have Amazon Prime. And in the US, you can purchase it to rent on Amazon Prime. Or it's also, if you have Showtime, it's currently playing on Showtime. And yes, obviously elsewhere in the world in different places. It's about to come out, very excitingly, in China, we just heard, which is very difficult to get a movie to pass the censors there. And the movie has been given a very coveted slot. They show like 20 foreign movies a year, and they've chosen this to be one. So it's coming out there in November, December. It's coming out in Japan in a couple of weeks. So it's still rolling out.
That is amazing news about China. So how will people see it in China?
I believe it's a cinema release, and then it will be followed by some sort of streaming in China. And I don't know anything about the services there, but that's obviously a huge audience there. And as I said, it's maybe one can read into that some sort of political motivation from the Chinese. I don't know, but they've given it a coveted slot, which is great.
That's incredible. And will you be doing some promotional events and stuff like?
I don't think we're doing any in-person events, but I'll be doing some press. I'm currently doing some press for Japan, and so it's fascinating seeing how the movie goes down in different countries. I've personally talked to a lot of Middle Eastern people, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Emirates, and it is very interesting their perspectives on the film. And of course, the European perspective is different. The continental European perspective is different. So yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely a film which divides its audiences. But it has an international appeal. It definitely has an international appeal also, which again is helped very much by having Sherlock Holmes in a leading role and Jodie Foster, and I think that brings people to watch a film that maybe they otherwise might be inclined to avoid.
And a brilliantly told film. I'm so intrigued by how China will respond. Obviously not.
Yes, me too. I'll let you know.
So intrigued, and particularly as the rhetoric is so aggressive right now between the US and China. The film is also rescreening at this festival on Tuesday at noon Eastern, and it's available in the US and the UK on the website for the festival. And then that you'll get an email about when Muhammadu can join. So perhaps we'll sort of wrap it up there. Would you like to make any final comments, Teri and Kevin?
Just thank you so much for having me. It's been great. And yeah.
Thank you very much to everyone, and apologies for being late. And I'm sure Muhammadu would like me to share his apologies. He never misses any of these things normally, and he will be heartbroken that he did. He really enjoys meeting an audience and telling his story. And so, yes, if you can catch him later in the week or sometime in the festival, that would be, I think, worth your while.
And you can find him on Twitter and on Instagram. So feel free to send him a message there because he's very responsive. So do mention you saw the movie. Well, a huge thank you to you both. This has been a really, really great chat. Thank you to the organizers of the War on Terror Film Festival, Lena and Frank, and all the amazing partners who do this work, you know, round the clock for years and years and years. Thank you all. Thank you everyone for being here. And as Kevin said, please spread the word, Amazon Prime and other places. And, you know, let's hope for a really, really long and widespread life cycle for this film. Not lifestyle, life cycle. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Susie.
Bye.
Night, everyone.
Bye, Teri. Bye-bye.
Take care.